Hey everyone, Aaron Stewart, Data Access Golf, the simulcast. Going to do this on video and also recording a podcast at the same time. So just need to wrap up this season. This will be our last, obviously, of the 2018-2019 season, and coming up pretty quick, we'll be starting the new season. So let's just jump right into it at this Data Monday, see how Rory got it done, and have a good chat. Welcome back. Okay, I've got everything set up. Hopefully it's working okay. Looks like the uptake's not really good on the audio, so we'll fix that a little bit. That looks good. Okay, so thanks for joining me, Aaron Stewart, here with you, Data Access Golf. Wow, what a season and what a way to wrap it up. Definitely some of the discussions going on today are, Player of the Year and how that's supposed to come about. Brooks Koepka, obviously, with the point scoring, won it as far as the PGA Tour goes. Now we're going to wait for the voting and see how that goes. I don't necessarily see it going any other way, and we'll talk about that as we go over the data from Rory's big win. I was super impressed with Rory. I thought that this has been a good year for Rory. I mean, let's wrap it all up. Rory has had a number of top 10s. Rory has mentally seemed to have just adjusted a little bit, and he played super consistent golf most of the year. Obviously, I think the one big thing that was a little surprising to all of us is when he didn't make the cut at the British Open, on his home course. That was a little interesting. But, and again, I want to apologize to our English friends. We say British Open just so we know what we're talking about. I'm not doing it to offend anybody, but around here, if you don't tell which Open it is, we get super confused because we've got at least here, we've got the Provo Open, the Utah Open. We've got Opens everywhere. Like every town has an Open. So if you don't really describe what it is, just by saying the Open can be super confusing. So again, apologize to my English friends. I know that I get comments whenever I call it that. I don't mean to offend anybody. It's more descriptive. It just kind of helps us dumb Americans know what we're talking about. Okay? Does that make everybody, my UK friends, feel better about it? We'll just call ourselves dumb and we'll move on from there. Okay, so let's jump right into it. I was, again, really impressed with Rory. He obviously has, I don't know, it's interesting because there's a group of folks that believe that he is underperformed, underaccomplished, and then there's a group that thinks that Rory's exactly where he should be, and there's a group that thinks that he's the best in the world right now. So I never like to get into sort of these discussions comparing one generation to another generation. That doesn't seem to be equitable, in that it's impossible to take in all the different variables, but we like to throw out greatest of all time here, there, and whatever. Kind of hard to do that. But there's definitely some benchmarks. We use benchmarks to check to make sure that our play is up to where we'd like it, based on benchmarks we use here at Data Access Golf, and we'll talk about those in a little bit as well. But it seems to me, when it gets right down to it, the only way we can measure a person's place in history is by the tournaments that they've won. So that seems to be all we can remember. That seems to be all that we focus on. And of those, majors are the most important. And that seems to be where we can at least agree most often. And so we've got this, we talk about Jack Nicklaus and his 18 majors, and we talk about Tiger Woods and his 15 majors, so kind of a big year there. And then where does it all sort of settle out, right? The arguments of greatest of all time always seem to sort of eventually end up at the number of majors they have. And I think with Player of the Year, we're going to be looking that way as well. Okay, so I wanted to jump right into it just like we do every single week. We call it a Data Monday. This is obviously not Monday. For those of you that are coming to us live, and for the podcast, it is Monday. But we'll talk about some things. We had some problems getting hold of some data. The PGA Tour stats page wasn't working very well, so that was a bit of a challenge. But we eventually got most of them and good enough to get the show done and wrap it up for the year. So let's jump in and do that really quickly. I'm going to jump up on my screen. You'll see me looking up. I've got a screen above the camera that I look at and do my work on. So we'll pull that up really quickly here. There we go. And you've got me sitting right there looking at it with you. So again, what we like to start with is go over sort of to get to know the champions a little bit better. So I always like to pull some information from Wikipedia and other sources, typically Wikipedia, but it was interesting. This is the first time that I've gone to Wikipedia and Wiki, do I have Wiki there? Isn't it Wikipedia? I'll need to check that. I think it's Wiki. Anyway, I went to pull up some information and they hadn't updated yet with his latest win. And typically they're so fast, but they didn't get that done. But anyway, we know full well, and we'll get into how many cuts, how many victories, and all of that going forward. So, Rory McIlroy was a former world #1 player for 95 weeks. Obviously, right now, he is not #1, but he did move up in the world rankings, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. From Northern Ireland, why that is important, honestly, for a lot of different reasons. We had an Irishman win in Northern Ireland at the British Open earlier this year, and that was a big deal, politically speaking, and we won't get into a lot of politics here on Data Access Golf, but that was a big deal, and everybody expected that it would be, Rory McIlroy that would be in the hunt, or a Graham McDowell, and there was, Shane Lowry, who was an Irishman, not a Northern Irishman, but it still seemed to bring that whole group, all of Ireland together, which was a very cool thing. Okay, Rory is one of only 4 players to win 3 majors by the age of 25, joining the likes of Jack Nicklaus, Tiger Woods, and Jordan Spieth. Okay, we will not talk about Jordan Spieth today. I promise you that. Bless his heart. In 2011, at the age of 22, he became the youngest player to reach $10 million euros on the European Tour. So fastest to do that at age 22. He was worth over 10 million, had winnings of over 10 million bucks. Euros are worth more than bucks right now. So, and then in 2012, he did the same thing, went over 10 million in career earnings on the PGA Tour. So at the age of 23. So very accomplished and very wealthy from a very early age. And he's one of those child prodigies. Like we saw Tiger Woods on the Bob Hope show when he was very little. And then there's that show. There's that show over in Britain of Rory, very little, swinging at a golf club. I think he's wearing a Nike hat, something like that, which he wears now. So very interesting how that's worked out, right? These child prodigies have kind of come up and embraced it. And I think that when you look at, and this is something I've thought about all week, when you look at like a Rory McIlroy, a Tiger Woods, a Michelle Wie, you look at some of these folks that were sort of, handed a label as kids to grow up and be spectacular in their sport. Each one of them's handled it a little bit differently. You even look at like a Lydia Ko now, and it's just sort of interesting to see how they figure out their way, and if it works out and if it doesn't. And you see kind of a Rory McIlroy, Tiger Woods, kind of more similar now than I think that I've seen them in previously, and especially if Rory can get back to winning majors. And then you look at like a Michelle Wie and a Lydia Ko and some other young golfers and see how they're kind of, it's interesting. It's a definitely interesting conversation, but obviously not one to have this day. And then Rory, with his big victory at the FedEx Cup, became the only other player to win 2 FedEx Cups, joining Tiger Woods, which is, in the game of golf, never bad company. Okay, so what did that do for our champion? Well, it took Rory McIlroy in the world golf rankings from number 3 to number 2, so not a big jump for him, but he started the year at 8th. So a very good year for Rory McIlroy. Obviously, the world golf rankings are over a 2-year period, so to move up 6 spots, and it gets very difficult when you get to the top. So to move up 6 spots over the course of the year is really quite well done. He had a very, very good year to get that done. And obviously in the FedEx Cup rankings, he went from number 5 all the way up and won it. His goal entering into the week, which I thought was super fascinating, his goal was to win it outright. He didn't want to rely on, strokes. He wanted to overcome the strokes that Justin Thomas had and everybody else had. He just wanted to win it outright. And with that birdie on 18, he did exactly that. So Rory would have won the tournament no matter what. He played the best over the course of those 4 days. It wasn't some sort of and I do think that he probably did the PGA Tour a huge favor, because had he not done that, we would have been talking about, well, for the 4 days, he wasn't the best player. But with Rory making that a goal and getting it done, he took care of all of that for the PGA Tour. So it probably make it a little easier to pay him the $15 million, because he took a lot of the questions away that they probably would have had to deal with over that. So again, Brooks Koepka remains number one, and we'll look at that really quickly in our next screen here. So you see that Brooks Koepka now still has a considerable lead on Rory McIlroy for number one in the world. And he has held that he finished the end of 2018 number one in the world, and he's still number one in the world at the end of at least the PGA Tour season. And there's a few little changes in there. You've got Rory jumping all the way from he's up from third to second. He started at eighth. Dustin Johnson actually dropped one, got bumped down there. But if you look here, you've got Justin Rose stayed the same, Justin Thomas stayed the same, John Rahm stayed the same, Patrick Cantlay stayed the same, Tiger Woods stayed the same, and then you've got Xander Schauffele going from 11th all the way up into 9th. And this, I did not know that Xander finished 2018 at 10th. So with all his fine play and his victory and all that, he's only moved up one spot in the world rankings. I didn't know he was that high. So obviously very interesting. You see a Bryson DeChambeau who dropped up a point, with Xander bumping him down. And then again, an interesting thing here too. Bryson DeChambeau finished the year at 5th in the world and now has dropped all the way to 10th. Looking at the final FedEx Cup season points, we see that obviously Rory McIlroy finished up at the top. Xander Schauffele in second place in the FedEx Cup. And then Brooks Koepka, Justin Thomas, Paul Casey, Adam Scott, Tony Finau. And you can see there, you can see those three dashes, the number of wins. You've got Adam Scott, Tony Finau, and Hideki Matsuyama, who finished in the top 10, or at least tied for the top 10 in the FedEx Cup without a victory. Everybody else on that has won at least one. And then you've got Brooks Koepka and Rory McIlroy each winning 3, which obviously is pretty impressive. So that's how the year sort of wraps up. Obviously, there's going to be some more movement in the world golf rankings as we still have the European Tour going on, and then we'll start the funny season, right? The PGA season will start up here in another week, and we'll be back in it to the 2019-2020 season soon enough. So, okay, hopping now to the consistency scale. This is something that we look at. It's basically a data point that tells us how consistent a player has been over the course of their career. I've broken them out based on, and again, these are my terms, but I like to know how players are doing. And you can see here we've got only Tiger Woods, and this all resets when we start the next year. So I only keep track of those that are previous winners in the year. I might leave a couple of these in here just so we can kind of get an idea going forward. But Legends, only Tiger Woods has made over 90% of his cuts in his career. Elite players include Brooks Koepka, McIlroy, Molinari, Dustin Johnson, Mickelson, Justin Rose, and Patrick Cantlay. They are elite players making 80 to 89% of their cuts. Solid players make 79 players. These are guys that are been on the PGA Tour typically for a long time, know how to get the job done and get the wins done. Get a few wins here and there and a number of high enough finishes where they keep their card year to year. And Holmes, Mitchell, and Paul Casey fit into that category. You've got the good players that are right on the fringe. Sometimes they don't quite make it, and sometimes they are just fine, with Kisner, McDowell, Pan, Palmer, Na, winners this year. And then Connors, Homa, and Kang, they've made less than 59% of their cuts and would have lost their cards had they not won. Rory McIlroy, as far as his consistency rating goes, he's played in 168 tour events and he's made 145 cuts, which puts him at an 86% rate, which is it's great, obviously. Brooks Koepka for the entire year, he only missed one cut the entire year. So he was well up into the 90% and had a legend year for sure. Rory was actually right below him. So interesting in that category. And now we're going to get to move right into, boom, the benchmarks. And I love the benchmarks, and I love talking about the benchmarks. You'll see there in scrambling, for whatever reason, I couldn't get scrambling out of the PGA Tour stats. It just wasn't available. But I was able to go around to different sources and find everything else. So we're pretty close. I don't see us changing these benchmarks these are obviously benchmarks that we created based on 2018 numbers, but they've held up so true. And I've been running them now for 3 weeks with the 2019 numbers when they ended the season, when they ended the season, they started the playoffs, and they still look really solid. So nothing really changes year to year. So I still think these benchmark numbers will be solid going forward, which is important because these are the numbers that I use in the app. The soon-to-be released app, man, that's taken a long time. It's driving me crazy, but we're getting closer. Okay, so for this tournament, driving accuracy, Rory McIlroy hit 64% of his fairways, and typically in 2019 hit 62% of his fairways. So he was 2 points higher than that, and East Lake was set up tough. I mean, it was a tough test of golf this time around. I find it so fascinating that it's not consistent. Like East Lake has been sometimes super hard and sometimes it's been pretty inert. And I just find it really interesting. I don't think the players really know what they're going to get when they go to East Lake because it's been so different from year to year, which is cool. I think that's really great. Our driving accuracy benchmark, essentially meaning that if we are hitting less than 55% of our fairways, then we would mark that as an area of our game that needs attention. But Rory McIlroy, obviously above 55%. With 64 and 62. Those who were below that number for the 2018 season, Phil Mickelson, Tony Finau, and Jimmy Walker. Okay, so Tony Finau's proven that. I'll be really interested to see what Tony Finau's. I'm going to have to go and adjust these numbers for the 2019. I'll see if Tony Finau seems to have been driving the ball a lot better since he moved to that ping driver. It'll be interesting to see how he ended up his year. But I looked at it a little while ago, and I think he was up into the 60s. So it'll be interesting to see if that number didn't come up. All right, for greens and regulation for the tournament, this was interesting that Rory McIlroy hit 69% of his greens. He averaged 69% of his greens in 2019, so he's right on the button. Our benchmark is 65%. So here it is. The winner of the Tour Championship only hit 4 points higher than our benchmark for his greens and regulation. Kind of tells you how tough the course was. We usually see that a little bit higher with our champions, but that just kind of goes to show you how tough the course was. And you know what? This is the wrong. I'm going to get rid of that. Okay, cool. And then you've got Rory, sand saves. So Rory McIlroy typically averages 55% in 2019. He got up and down 80%, which was a big deal for the Tour Championship. And that's considerably higher than the 45% we have as our benchmark. And I've got a few people listed there. Bubba Watson and Gary Woodland get up and down less than 45% out of the sand. His strokes gained putting was only slightly better than his tour average, the 2019 average of .425, only .5451. So we have seen, like last week, Justin Thomas won that tournament with some really hot putting. That wasn't the case with Rory McIlroy. He did not. He putted what he normally does, and he didn't win every single week. So he actually got it done doing some other things. And if we see that his other than sand save, everything else is pretty close to what he normally does, which just means that's how much harder the course was. Course was tough this week, is what the data tells us. For scrambling, I don't have a tournament number for his scrambling numbers up and down. 63% is what he averages for all of 2019. And our benchmark for that is 55%. So anything around the green, getting up and down in two, we want to do that 55% of the time. This is the thing that I found super shocking out of all this data. Rory McIlroy makes 93% of his 5-footers. That is awesome. Yeah, that's amazing. So Rory really, in order for his scrambling numbers to be awesome, all of those numbers to get better, he just has to get the ball within 5 feet, and he'll make 93% of them. He has perfected what we talk about in our putting strategy. Make sure that we're practicing these 5-footers and in to make them so rock solid over 90%. that it takes all the pressure off our short game around the green and out of the sand. Rory's done that. So now if he just tightens up his sand game, 80% obviously is awesome. If you're 80%, so he got up and down for 80% of the time, right? So you would assume that he was able to get his sand shots within 5 feet, and he makes 93% of them. See how that kind of works out? That's why I really wanted to see his scrambling number for the week, but it just wasn't available. But I'm guessing it's pretty high. I'm guessing it's pretty good. And that also tells us that in 2019, he was only getting up and down 63% of the time scrambling. He wasn't getting it in within that 5 foot mark because he's 93% from 5 feet. Okay, so very cool. And Rory's putting actually pretty solid, 28.4 putts per round, which means that he does have to get up and down, right? And he does do so to score as well and play as well as he did this year. All right, now let's get into the fun stuff, the money. Obviously, you won a lot more money than normal, and we get it, and it was a bonus and all this, but still fun to look at. So the Tour Championship, obviously his prize money was $15 million. His score for the week was 267, which meant that he made $3.75 million per day, right? And averaging a 5-hour round, he earned $750,000 per hour, which equals, if you divide in that 267 strokes, $56,180 per stroke. Okay, so if they take a little more time when they know that that each stroke was roughly worth $56,000, right? I mean, you'd expect them to play a little slower, wouldn't you? No? Maybe? I heard some folks on the radio say that it didn't seem like they really cared about the money at all. Nobody seemed any more nervous than they normally are. They just went out and played their game. And if that's exactly how they were doing it, it's brilliant. We talk about that a lot here at Data Access Golf, of making sure that we are present and not bouncing around inside of our heads, making things more difficult on ourselves than they need to be. Rory McIlroy then, he's made 145 cuts. His dollar per cut would go way up, but the PGA Tour doesn't count bonuses towards your prize money. So we're just going to leave it as we're going to go as the PGA Tour goes. He makes $335,000, essentially $336,000 per cut. And so if we look at the money versus cut list down there, you still got Tiger Woods there in first place with $365,000 per cut. But you've got Rory McIlroy now $30,000 behind him. You've got Dustin Johnson in third place at $288,000 per cut. You've got Brooks Koepka very close to Dustin Johnson at $286,000 per cut. And Justin Thomas actually dropped a little bit this year, went down to $277,000 per cut. So those are our 5 leaders based on the winners this year. That has to reset now for next year, and probably wait for a few weeks until we get that up and going. Some cool stats again on Rory for the week. I thought, obviously, Rory loves the FedEx Cup. I mean, over the years, he has earned in total $9.7 million in prize money. But look at his bonus money, $31 million in bonus money from the FedEx Cup. So just from the FedEx Cup alone, he has taken over $40 million home. So FedEx Cup, East Lake, and Rory, they get along very, very well. And I'll bet at any time Rory wants to go to Atlanta, his wife would be like, knock yourself out, buddy. We'll see you in a few days. Bring home the cash. So I thought that was pretty interesting. I saw that on Golf Channel when they were reporting on it and took note of it. And let me see. Let's go to the next page here. Some other cool, I think, stats that came out of this as well. So his 2019 accomplishments then for Rory McIlroy, he had 3 wins. We mentioned earlier also Brooks Koepka has had 3 wins. Those are the only 2. If you throw in that $15 million, Rory McIlroy pulled in close to $23 million this year. So a really good year. Again, you're throwing in $15 million. So if you take that out, he's $7.785 million for the year. Still great, but second to Brooks Koepka. Brooks Koepka pulled in almost $9 million in prize money, or just over $9 million in prize money. So Brooks Koepka still right there. And then he's the first player to win the Players' Championship and the FedEx Cup in the same year. So just some kind of interesting stats there. And then to wrap it all up, I mean, this is the last, obviously, tournament of the 2018-19 season. So again, our quick review: Tiger Woods wins the Masters for his 15th. Brooks Koepka, we already talked about, won a major this year. So good to see Gary Woodland win. And then Shane Lowry, we discussed a little bit earlier. Everybody thought it was Rory or Graham or one of the local boys, but Shane Lowry, who's Irish, did win it, and it brought the whole place together, continent together, really. Good stuff. Just one final note on the Player of the Year and how this thing has shaken out. Talked about it a little bit before. This is one of the important screens that we talked about. It seems to be in professional golf, it's about majors. And that's really all we talk about. Brooks Koepka won a major this year. Rory didn't. Brooks Koepka won more money this year than Rory McIlroy in wins. And Brooks Koepka is still ranked number 1 in the world. He is. He will win Player of the Year. I just don't see how it goes any other way. And you can't take anything away from Rory McIlroy's year. It was awesome. So, okay, that's it. Until next time, Aaron Stewart from Data Access Golf. Thanks for joining me. It'll be a great season next year. Until next time, thanks.